So if you're a marketer, let me ask, how confident are you that your content actually connects in every market? If you're guessing, it might be time to check out Phrase. Phrase is the industry-leading AI localization platform that helps you deliver content in multiple languages without losing your tone, your message, or your mind. It automates the manual work, slashes review time, and gives you real data on what's working where. Brands like Uber and Zendesk trust Phrase to scale their content across the globe and get it right every time. If you're serious about reaching more people and driving better results internationally, head over to phrase.com/MPN and take a look. That's phrase.com/MPN.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Coming up on this episode of the Entrepreneurial You.
Leadership at bottom line is really about taking on the role of, I like to say, a shepherd or a steward or a servant first. What we do is not for everyone, it's for someone, and that's okay. And I think that is also kind of like a great mantra for companies.
Hey, it's John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and it's the Entrepreneurial You, the show for dedicated and passionate Caribbean entrepreneurs seeking daily inspiration, brought to you by author, speaker, and award-winning entrepreneur Heneka Watkis-Porter. You must be prepared to ignite.
All right, I'm excited because, as you know, what time it is? Yes, it is time for the Entrepreneurial You podcast. Yes, it's my favorite, or one of my favorite times of the week. I'm your host, Heneka Watkis-Porter. Today, we're talking about scaling teams and operations for long-term success, not just in the now, but for long-term. So my guest is Andrew Almazon, an expert in cross-functional operations and high-performance team building with over 15 years of leadership experience across industries like hospitality, digital media, and craft brewing. Now, Andrew has driven transformation as VP of People Operations for a top 5 automotive media company, and now applies his expertise as an assistant GM at one of Southern California's original craft breweries. So, if you are indeed looking for actionable strategies that will help you to scale your business while fostering a thriving business culture, then this episode is what you definitely need to be tuning into. So, Andrew Almazon, welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneurial You podcast.
Heneka, thank you so much. I am looking forward to being here and having an amazing conversation, and hopefully it's inspiring and valuable to your audience.
Oh, I have no doubt that it absolutely will be, because we're talking about scaling teams and operations for long-term success. And just as a setting the stage kind of vibe for our audience, we know that scaling isn't just about growth. What it is really is, it's about building systems that work seamlessly across teams while maintaining a very strong company culture. Because as we're growing, we want to make sure that our culture is also staying and we're growing, getting better, but we're not deviating from that. So Andrew specializes in helping businesses navigate complex challenges while unlocking their team's full potential. So let's discuss how operational excellence drives sustainable success. Andrew, what's the one thing that you've learned about leadership from working in such diverse industries?
Yes, that's a beautiful question, I think, to kick us off. And for me, if I had to just choose one thing, I think it's that leadership at bottom line is really about taking on the role of, I like to say, a shepherd or a steward or a servant first. Because when you're scaling, when you're rolling out a new or, game-changing initiative within your building, within your sector, it really does start with how well you lead the people who are along for that ride with you through that change process. So I think really being and embodying what it means to help guide and shepherd people through change is one of the most important things that I've learned.
Awesome. Guiding people and shepherding them through change, because the one thing we know is that change is constant. Very paradoxical, but change is very constant. So we can't avoid it. Now,
Absolutely.
you have had a long-standing career as, as a leader, scaling teams and so on. So what has been your experience like, really? How did you get into this era of development, and why did you choose to, or as they proverbially say, you didn't choose it, it chose you?
Yes, yes, it really did choose me in that sense, in that when I was at the media company, I was at that media company for over a decade, and I'd started out as, one of the more entry level positions as a staff writer. My background is in journalism. First and foremost, it's what I got my bachelor's in. And so shortly out of college, around 2012, date me for that. I was able to get my foot in the door in this media company, but along the way, over the course of years, as they passed, I started to gravitate and understand that outside of being a creative, I was very passionate about helping my fellow colleagues at the time approach their own objectives, their challenges, while minimizing the stress that oftentimes comes with that. Maybe you're presented as a sole contributor in your organization, a challenge by your superiors, and you may or may not have the context or the capability in the moment to really feel like you're able to achieve it at a high level. So what I found that I ended up doing a lot of the times was leaning on my task management, my organizational capabilities to get my own commitments done. And then my hobby in work was really kind of going around and helping other editors at the time, even cross-functionally, even salespeople, publishers, help be a creative brainstormer, a brain trust collaborator, so to speak, to help them achieve kind of whatever their objectives were. And I think that was different for a lot of my colleagues, because oftentimes I know people who are listening may feel or experience this. Sometimes we show up to work and it's like every person for themselves, right? You're just trying to clear through the list, trying to appease your superiors or meet the objectives that are specific to your role. I got a lot of joy out of accomplishing my tasks with a little bit of time baked in. And I owe that to a lot to like task management and organizational capability. And then from there, spending a little bit of time helping others. That's what actually one of the things that renewed me was ending the day feeling like I helped someone else. And I ended the day feeling very valuable in that sense. So I started to think around like halfway through my career there, how can I build a career roadmap that leverages more of this, that slowly peels me away from the creative day to day, where now I could do 80% of my time within that organization helping develop systems, processes to, create efficiency for people, or serving on the senior leadership team with a special focus on how can we lead our people, maximize buy-in when we have multi-departmental change or multi-phase change initiatives. And kind of that's how I kind of built a career out of that. It really was instinctually listening to what gave me renewal. And then at a certain point, after building enough influence within the organization, finding a way to bring that up, make a case for a role that didn't exist at the time, which was the VP of People Operations.
Wow, that's an interesting story and an interesting perspective on just how we should be really in the workplace. Because, as you say, usually the culture is every man for himself or woman for herself. And everybody's thinking, oh, but I have all of these on my to do list. If I stop to help you, then how do I, get these done and ensure that at the end, when there is, evaluation, that I stay on top of my game. So this just goes to show that when we step outside of ourselves at times as leaders and be willing to help, put people first, then in the end, it works to our benefits.
Totally agree. I mean, if, I I also want to qualify. I think for me and what I tell people through my executive coaching that I do is my path and my path to personal success is not for everyone. I think the common denominator or the theme that I would advocate for is doing some deep reflection and doing the investigative work, the internal work to understand what gives you life when it comes to your profession. For some people, it might be being regarded as an innovator, being given a lot of authority and resources to develop new and innovative ways to take that company to the next level. For me, it was helping others do that within their own zone of impact, within by helping them uncover their strengths and then being very candid about the areas that they might need to elevate or develop if they wanted to achieve whatever vision they had for themselves. So yeah, I definitely think it's really about finding what you're passionate about and then doing the work to make the case for the company or your stakeholders to be able to leverage that in an official capacity.
Right. And no doubt you've seen companies as you've, been in there, watch them scale, watch across industries. So I'd like to ask you, what are some common mistakes, business mistakes that persons make when trying to scale operations?
I think doing it in a silo and what I mean by that is if we're speaking to individuals and the audience listening is functioning, we're going to assume as part of a larger organization with multiple departments. When we seek to create solutions in just the tunnel of our own department, and if you're on sales and there's an overarching objective that's going to help your company elevate in either revenue or addressing market share. Uh, Solving that, coming up with something that's just focused on what you do day to day without leveraging the brain power or the creativity or the insight of people and human resources in accounting, in your creative departments, your IT departments, as examples. I think what we do is we might come up with something that addresses a facet of the potential, but when you take into account a larger picture of professionals and what their perspectives are, then I think you really unlock the capability of what it means to scale. So, what's at stake also, if we don't break out of the silos, I think is potential is capped. And then we run the risk of creating solutions that are out of alignment with the intended mission or core values of an organization.
Absolutely. You are speaking giving a lot of insights. And as I listen to you, I'm all I can think of next to ask is, in order to scale, right, there needs to be some level of high performance happening amongst teams. So, how do you foster high performance teams while maintaining employee satisfaction? Because sometimes, there has to be you kind of think there's a trade off, because sometimes employees would rather not be so pressured to perform, right? So, how do you foster the high performance team while maintaining the employee satisfaction?
As a vice president of operations or people operations specifically, I really advocated and focused on active listening first. As executives or people in leadership positions, we have the gift and the curse of sometimes, because of our elevated view of the organization, we oftentimes see the solutions and challenges from a different vantage point than people on the ground floor. So what I think tends to happen is we tend to kick the door down in terms of creating solutions. But I think pausing for a moment and then identifying and gathering feedback from people at every rung of the organization, from the bottom all the way to the top. So, first and foremost, I think listening to our people, especially if we're running into issues where you at the leadership level, you're seeing someone who you feel might not be engaged for whatever reason. Maybe, they just come into work and it seems like maybe they have high potential, but for whatever reason, they're not as collaborative, or maybe they're not living the values of the company. I think before making any assumptions and creating any people or talent related solutions onto how you're going to solve that, take a moment as a leader, spend 10, 15 minutes and be candid with that individual. Hey, I'm noticing this. We're about to embark on something very important with the organization, and I'm gathering some feedback. I know my impression is maybe that you're not as engaged. Help me understand, if am I telling this story accurately, or is there something that I might be missing? Something very simple where you're opening the door for them to share with you. I've ran into it many times where somebody, a staff, was in love with the mission of the organization. They just, for whatever reason, felt like they weren't heard or given an opportunity at the table. So giving them that opportunity to speak and share their kind of truth, that might do a lot for us as leaders as a step one. Because in disengagement doesn't necessarily mean they're out the door, right? And then I think making a determination from that point after active listening, you can take account of the people on your team. This person has the potential. There are some things that we as employers need to meet. And then asking ourselves as leaders or managers or executives, is what that individual has communicated to us, that gap that we're not providing, is that something that we as an organization can seek to close? Can we meet that gap without compromising the mission or the core values? Because sometimes someone might just say, hey, I don't like the way that, you know, our philosophy on community engagement, it's not important to me. I just kind of want to be the best salesperson, and give me a goal. And I bet you 200% I will crush that goal and exceed that goal. But if you have aspects of your organization that are important to the identity, the DNA, that's one of the ironies, I think, in a leadership standpoint, is sometimes you have high level talent, but that they're out of alignment with the core values of an organization. So I think listening is going to reveal a lot first about what we have in front of us in terms of talent.
Okay, absolutely. And no doubt you've seen some cultural transformation throughout your journey. How do you approach that within an organization, Andrew?
I think you have to first gain alignment. You have to reach a place of mutual understanding with all decision makers and influential figures about what does success look like within this building? What are the standards of excellence within this building? And what does a high level contributor to this team look and feel like? And I think you should be able to agree on that, have some sort of consensus on it, and then be great internal promoters. You must, in my opinion, create that avatar and communicate that profile of what a high level talent looks like within your organization, because now you're giving people the candor and the clarity of what it takes to excel within the building. And different companies have different profiles of what success looks like. I think different characteristics and traits. And Seth Godin is a marketing guru who once said it. He said, when he was asked about how he goes through developing marketing campaigns, one of my favorite quotes, and it applies even to leadership and personal development. He said, what we do is not for everyone, it's for someone, and that's okay. And I think that that is also kind of like a great mantra for companies, right? Like, I think a lot of CEOs, a lot of founders, they do a lot of work trying to, and getting frustrated when someone doesn't kind of fit within their little mold of what a high level person looks like. As a VP of people, I had to tell senior leaders all the time, you know, if we're out of alignment with them, that's okay. We give them an opportunity to understand what high level talent looks like here. And if that's completely oil and water to who they are, then you don't have to spend a bunch of time trying to change a person. You know, let them know what it looks like and give them the opportunity to find something else in their journey. You know, so yeah,
Absolutely. Having that conversation is essential. I love that you reference Seth. I mean, I love Seth. He's been on the Entrepreneurial You twice.
amazing.
On the second time around, we spoke about his one of his later books, and it's shipping the practice, shipping creative work. So and I love that. I love that conversation we had because it was centered around you don't have to be perfect to get things done. You just need to start. Essentially, is the message of that book. And so, even within an organization, you don't have to be perfect, do things perfectly. But what is important is that some level of introspection takes place. So, my next question to you, Andrew, is what role does introspection play in effective leadership?
It's step one. It's step one. We have to work on the inside before we can do something about the outside, in my opinion. If we as leaders we're subject to our own bias, our own ways of viewing the world, and that's okay, right? We're all human, and we are all either we all either have these springboards for capability and potential or these limitations in terms of view. And that might come from, own traumas or crucibles. I think doing the work to understand those things about ourselves, especially if we have the responsibility to lead other people through change or through, initiatives, we have to know that, like as a perfect example, if you're a professional and you have lived and died by the sword of your clarity, your confidence, your brevity in terms of, communicating, but now in a leadership position, you're almost projecting that to people who might have different work styles. Maybe they need a little more collaboration. Maybe they want a little more one-on-one time in order to develop their buy-in, but that's manifesting for you as impatience, or maybe people might say, this leader never has a time. They're usually kind of just crunching the numbers. And if you come in and looking for some time with them, it's frustration. That's okay that we feel like that if that's you as a leader, but you have to understand that it's not about you in a leadership position at this point, right? Like if you're trying to get great outcomes from people that you lead, you have to find a way to check that or balance that, because someone who on the ground floor is ultimately going to be carrying a brunt of that initiative. And if you want the best out of them and the buy-in, you have to make the time when you might not have made the time, or it might not have been made for you. And it's just kind of like, that's just how you show up these days.
Awesome. All right. So it's now time for our community connection segment. And this is where I hear from your listeners or I share with you what's coming up so that you can be part of us. Now, what's coming up is we now have registration for cohort 6 open for Grace to Grow Mentorship and Training. And that's my social enterprise where women who need a second chance to walk in their God-given purpose are mentored over a 12-week period for free on leadership, entrepreneurship, and several different areas. Now, the cohort 6 begins in July. So if you know somebody who just feel out of sorts, a woman who feel out of sorts and who needs some guidance, then have them reach out to me at Heneka Watkis-Porter.com so that they can sign up or they can send a WhatsApp 876-849-2571. And of course, you've been hearing me talk a lot about the upcoming leadership cruise. Yes, it's a leadership cruise for women where leaders like yourself can network and grow aboard Royal Caribbean's Liberty of the Seas. This 5-day event combines empowerment with transformative learning against the stunning backdrop of the Bahamas. So again, that same contact information, Heneka at HenekaWatkis-Porter.com or WhatsApp 876-849-2571 for more details. Absolutely. Let me continue my conversation with Andrew Almazon. We have been just talking all things leadership scaling for the long-term success, not just for now, but for long term. So as we wrap our conversation, Andrew, scaling teams and operations for long-term success, what are your final thoughts? What are your encouraging words to leaders who are feeling a bit like, oh my gosh, like I am leading a bunch of people and I just cannot bother. I cannot. What are your encouraging parting words for them?
I would say, think first when you say I cannot. If you're feeling I cannot, ask yourself why. It goes back to the deep work of the internal work. First, ask why, and it's a really important step. Be able to articulate why you feel like you cannot, and I think that's going to reveal a lot of areas, right? Like for you that are it's going to reveal the path that you must take in order to start to feel like you can turn that cannot into can. And when we ask ourselves that question, I think what will happen, and there's a book called The War of Art, a little flip on the art of war. It is a very
Mhm.
popular book. It sometimes talks about identifying as part of like your daily routine, and you have a task, a list of things to do. Look at each thing and internalize it before moving on to the next task as you're reviewing it. Which one gives you that pit in your stomach? And it talks about moving towards that, creating a relationship with identifying the thing that feels hardest or most intimidating and moving towards it. And I think the same thing will happen when you ask yourselves, why do I feel like I cannot? Because it might reveal, hey, I have to give a bunch of keynote presentations for this change to go right. And that's what's giving you a pit in your stomach. Now you know. Now you know the capability or the tool or the trait that you might need to develop and practice in order to start feeling like you have more ownership, a larger sense of control and agency in the success of the outcome. And that can be done in many ways. Pull some colleagues to help you. Be honest, but be vulnerable. Hey, I'm a little intimidated about what I have to do to lead this particular initiative, and I could really use some help here. Could you help me practice my presentations? Can you poke some holes in this process that we've developed? Be extremely and brutally honest with me because I want it to be absolutely perfect for our workforce. So I think my final encouraging words are actually, ironically, to be courageous and to be brave in leadership, you have to be vulnerable first, and you have to be willing to look at some of those kind of fears head on, and then come up with some partnership-based solutions to train yourself up.
Yes, fantastic. How might our listeners contact you for more of your wisdom, or just what it is you're up to, as well as you mentioned you have pre or chat, a giveaway, a free ebook. Let's talk about that as well, Andrew.
Absolutely. Yes. So outside of the me being a GM, AGM for a craft brewery, I'm also an executive coach. So you can keep up with what I do on that end through Brave Leadership Guild. So it's www.braveleadershipguild.com. You can follow me, Andrew Almazon, on LinkedIn. And then I'm also on Instagram under Brave Leadership Guild. As for the freebie, I'd love to invite everybody to check it out. It's a free ebook. I have a free download link. You can find it on my website, but it's called The Executive's Playbook for Better Business Execution. And I created it for 2025 to help executives who are, like in this conversation, preparing or passionate about leading their organizations through change. I systemized 11 real world change initiatives that I've led. And then I've kind of created a template of best practices. So maybe there's one or more of those cases that resonates with something that you're leading. You could take it as a guide to kind of set up a system both in the pre-planning, the buy-in building phase, implementation, and then post, analysis to see what the ROI was. You can just check that out at braveleadershipguild.com. If you go to the marketplace, the freebie will be right there under my free download section.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your generosity as well, Andrew. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Andrew Almazon.
Thank you so much, Heneka. You have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much. And now it's time for Trending Now. Did you know that companies with strong cross-functional collaboration are 5 times more likely to achieve high performance, while poor communication costs businesses an estimated $12 billion annually? Scaling isn't just about adding resources, it's about optimizing how those resources work together. And that's what's trending now. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, our guest, Andrew Almazon. And for our listeners who want more insights into scaling operations or building high performance team, you want some coaching where leadership is concerned, please connect with Andrew on Instagram, Brave Leadership Guilds. All right. So please go right there and reach out. If this episode inspired you, subscribe to the Entrepreneurial You, leave a rate or review on Apple or Spotify. and share this podcast with someone who needs guidance, right, in their businesses, who needs some leadership nudging. We can all take some, refresher, even if there are things that we know already, or we can improve, we can learn something new. So by all means, do share it with somebody else because you found it helpful. All right. As that you affirm with me today, I am building scalable systems that empower my team and drive sustainable growth. And thanks so much to the Jamaica Stock Exchange and, of course, the Heneka Watkis-Porter.com for being sponsors of this episode. Do take care.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Robbie Samuels hosts the On the Schmooze podcast. Robbie, tell listeners what to expect from the show.
Since 2015, I've interviewed entrepreneurs who overcame challenges to achieve success in their field or industry. Tune in to On the Schmooze to listen as I ask deep questions to elicit untold stories about leadership and networking.
And where can people subscribe?
Find the show at ontheschmooze.com or on marketingpodcast.net, or just search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard them. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.